age in national and international settings.
Okay, thank you very much. And it's my pleasure to comment on this paper because I think it can't be praised high enough in really shifting our focus a bit. I think you can learn most from things when you are forced really to think about things that are usually taken for granted, like fixed retirement ages. And I'm using it so often in my own language, actually, to make arguments. And I think this perspective really on looking at prospective ages and basically prospective life expectancy pushes a few things around, I think. And in that sense, I think it's a highly innovative contribution and definitely worth thinking. The argument is quite compelling, I think, because we are so much arguing about the dynamics of demographic development, but we are not dynamizing the concepts which we are having. We are looking back basically at concepts that have developed throughout well, almost the beginning of the last century and so forth, and we are still using them, although we are well aware and we are often quoting the high dynamics in demographic development. And this, as argued in the presentation, also leads us to, I think, theoretical misconceptions and also wrong political conclusions in a sense. And looking backwards, basically at remaining life expectancy, really helps us actually to evaluate demographic aging. And the question, is there such, or is it not even rather rejuvenating society quite considerably? What I also find very compelling about the concept as such is that it really allows for comparisons across space and time without really needing to justify basically different age thresholds. For example, if you compare developed countries with less developed countries, Russia with Germany, for example, the concept of remaining life expectancy, I think, is quite much more sensible than referring to a chronological age. And the same goes for comparisons across time. So I think it's a very good and very helpful conceptual approach, also from a political perspective, because I think when you're, for example, looking at the German case where we are much investing into reversing the early retirement process at the moment, and you are looking, for example, at firm-level data when one asks employers, well, why do you not invest more into your older labor force, then a frequent reply is actually that it's being said that it's not worth because the age 65 or 67 is so close, so I invest a lot, I don't get much back. If we would think more in terms of remaining life expectancy instead of these rather inflexible age barriers, I think there would be much stronger arguments for really investing into older people, older workers, or also, for example, in educational policies, which many policymakers still shy off at the moment. And I think this makes a very strong argument. So as you see, I'm pretty convinced of the concept. So I will just make a few comments where I asked myself questions really as a sociologist and also as a life course sociologist, and which might be challenges for really moving from this concept of chronological age to the idea of remaining life expectancy. The first thing, and this might come due to my ignorance as being a sociologist and not really a demographer by training, is how surely can we predict life expectancy? And can we make basically strong assumptions that are safe enough for people to plan their lives today, in a sense? Can we tell people you will become 79 years of age, so at age 64, you have 15 years left, and this is a social role we foresee for you at that moment. Is that possible? I'm not sure whether this is the aim of the concept, but the question really is how safely can we predict that, and how safely can we predict that beyond national averages? I think if we are looking at remaining life expectancy, we also have to consider, as you mentioned, the differentiation within a country. Actually, you brought a nice example of the Tyroleans who are staying 4 years older, even within the same country. And I think this will be the same for occupational groups, for example, for educational groups, for people working in physically demanding or mentally demanding jobs than in other areas. So would we need to calculate respective ages for these different groups? And would these be really then fair ages in a sense? I think this is a question. I think also what is an important issue is that although chronological ages are in a sense comparatively unflexible, in the sense that they prescribe a fixed age for every person, I think this can also be an advantage of it, because a flexible age that develops alongside with the demographic aging process also induces uncertainty. And I think one of the major issues from a social perspective, but also from individual planning perspective, about, for example, having fixed ages, even though they may be misspecified at the moment, I agree with that, is that people could plan for that for their entire lives, that it gave safety to them, and that it also guaranteed something like equality within a society. Everybody could expect that one would need to work until 67, and this is an age limit that applies to all people, irrespective of educational degree, for example, occupational status or the like. I think if one takes this remaining life expectancy idea serious, then we would need to differentiate that. And I think this could be to really problems of fairness, because it will be difficult to tell somebody who is 67 in academia that he has to continue working for 2 further years, while his brother, who is 2 years younger and who has rather manual training, for example, enjoys retirement for the last 7 years, because according to physical demands during his career, he probably has a lower remaining life expectancy. So I think this could erode really fairness issues within society, at least from a from an individual perspective, and I think this would be at least a challenge if one takes a project and transfers it to that. And finally, basically, also from a life course perspective, I think you rightfully said that basically the boundaries and within the life course are shifting, and due to the demographic development that you sketched, it would be sensible to prolong working life until later ages, simply if we take this proportionality assumption that you should work for a certain period of time. I think even though this changes, I think some demographic processes, for example, like childbearing, might remain rather at a constant level. And at the moment, I think we are facing in many societies the problem that older people are increasingly needed to be involved in the care of their children due to low fertility ages, and basically as an effect of that, the decline in care institutions. I think this, as some studies have shown, is an increasingly important issue in, for example, retiring early or retiring right at the retirement age and then supporting your own children in this childcare issues. How can this be brought together basically with the demand to work longer while basically we have more or less, if we identified within the life course, constant demands at age 65 for intergenerational help. But I think these are basically rather detailed suggestions about how to deal with the concept. I think the concept as such is really thrilling and highly innovative, and I thank you very much for this contribution.
Thank you very much. Do you have any comments? The food is getting cold, but it's okay.
We can continue after.
No, there's other speakers after the break.
Yeah.
We'll go this way.
Yes, I have maybe suggestions, comments. One is that you did not mention at all the health issue. So I would expect in your measure to say that today someone who is 65 is like someone who was 55 a century ago, and you would take into account the health thing. I think this is an alternative thing. The other comment is about life cycle, also from health and maybe the issue of fertility is that the women's fertility age does not change with this lengthening of lifetime. And as a result, in Israel, we have the highest fertility, I would say, treatments in the whole world, because the government is paying for it. In fact, quite well, and women who do this longer life cycle, when they come to the point when they want to have children, it's no longer as easy as it was. So this is an issue that should be taken into account in the life cycle thing. And finally, one point about the longevity. This is one thing that I wanted to say, but I didn't have time, of course. And it's the issue of the fact that when you look at longevity, the maximum longevity has not changed over the last 150 years. So it's about 120 years, the biblical time. And what is happening is that we are more and more concentrated at the end of the life tables. And as a result, it's easier to predict that if longevity is higher, most people will make it, because the people who live life do it at the end. This is a very interesting phenomenon, and the major question is whether the barrier is going to be broken by new medicine.
Well, I'd like to pick up just from this last point, and that is that there was a sense from your talk that there's an exponential growth of remaining life expectancy, and I was asking myself if there is a diminishing return at some point. And I was reminded of the cartoon in The New Yorker of two men standing in the cemetery talking to each other, and the underneath it said, "Dead is the new 80." My other question brings us to the question of culture. And does the notion of remaining life expectancy need to intersect with culture to understand it? Can it be applied universally? I think it certainly can't. And how do you factor in culture?
I just wanted to continue. Yes. Like if my major, I love the idea of, it makes you frame things like different, but I think that it's until a limited point. And first of all, as a fact, 50% of the people aged 85 and over have dementia today. 50%. That's international. Oh yeah. It's any national studies done in Europe, in Canada, in the US, at different levels of dementia, but about for 50%. I have done a lot of research on that. 85. So the point that I want to make, not to talk about other physical disabilities, but dementia, which is one of the major. And I think that you can take your points until a limit, because I think in the past, people that lived to 85 were very selective, and those that live until 100 are very selective. But the people that are reaching older ages today, they're not selective. This is technologies and medicine that keep people alive. So it's not really that people are healthier. So I think that we have to just to be careful when we...
Good afternoon. I also, Daniel Gottlieb, I also was a bit interested by this word that you use, age inflation. Inflation for economists is something that is nominal. It's not a real thing. Now, when we talk about age, about longevity, we're talking about very real things. By the way, when you talk about inflation also, you enter into a subject which is called inflation expectations. So this is exactly what you're talking about. But then when you look at the economic models, then you see that there is adaptive expectations, there's rational expectations, and they are very, very much based on what happened up to the point where you have the expectations to the future. So anything that happened before remains very important. So I think this dichotomy is taken too far of the prospective age that you can sort of forget about the previous age, okay, about the chronological age. And also, I prefer to look at the whole life in a sequence. Let's say you have many problems that are created due to the fact that people study longer, they start the working process much later, but on the other hand, they have higher productivity, that's why they earn more, the economy becomes richer. These are all very important factors which will influence even the life expectancy and also the wealth that a person can acquire in order to live through these years after that. So I think we need to think about these things too.
I want to join Dirk and the others in enthusiastically approving of your shifting the frame of reference. I think we've learned in recent years, we being economists, have learned through the rise of what's called behavioral economics, which is really introducing sociology and psychology into realistic models of economic behavior, we've learned the importance of framing and how reframing an issue, it changes the way people behave and the decisions that they make. So in this regard, and in the interests of getting to lunch, I would just suggest that from an economist's point of view, another way of reframing this is in terms of human capital over the lifetime. Now, in rational models, the utility maximizing models of economists, we have a budget constraint with regard to labor supply that says your total wealth, human capital, is how much you could earn if you worked full-time for as long as you are capable of working. So from that point of view, increasing life expectancy adds a tremendous amount to one's human capital. But then the question is, how much are you going to take of that wealth in the form of leisure versus work? So the work versus leisure decision is a very important way of framing retirement. That's why I am so interested in phased retirement. The notion, and I would extend it to the younger years as well. That is, why can't people take more leisure earlier in life? Whether it's the childbearing years, whether it's the career building years, okay? So if we're reframing, let's go for it.
Can I just add a short question to your comment? Basically, we would expect that the present value of future earnings should be more or less the same as the human capital that you calculate from what you're worth from the past. There shouldn't be a big difference between that if we have perfect. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm enthusiastically in favor of those ideas. I call them lifetime rescheduling, and it's exactly that after so many years of contributing to Social Security, you would be entitled to a first sabbatical, family formation period, child-rearing period. Young people have to get out of the, you know, they maybe have some education, perfect their French or Hebrew or whatever. So people have good reasons to interrupt their working careers at an earlier stage and go on to work later. So I'm very happy about exactly this idea. Of course, one shouldn't carry this age inflation notion too far. But the question is, of course, nominal and real age. And real age, as I say, is a stage in life and not a chronological number. And if there's, say, a legislative period, I don't know how long it is in Israel, 5 years, 4 years passes, and from your end of life, in your passport, you have spent 4 years. You are 4 years older, but from your end of life, quote unquote, account, you have only spent 2 years. This is a very important difference. And so nominal and real age, I insist, real age is where are you in your life cycle and not how many years have you passed since your birth. And I think I will insist on not mixing this up. Jenny Brodsky, I mean, we can discuss. I don't have all the figures about dementia because I forgot them. But yours, I don't buy. Because, I mean, there's great female differences, you know, there's, if you go by 5 years, I would not make a very big group, everybody above the age of 75 or 85, because then, yes, there have a quarter of the population who is demented in one way or the other, but there are different stages. And then, of course, it still makes 75 to 80% of the people who are not demented above the age, which is still a lot. And if there are 10 million Germans, when I'll be 80, there will be 1 million Austrians and 10 million Germans, a nightmare vision, being above the age of 80. And the great majority of them will not be demented, hopefully. And we have seen that, you know, we have had so many below the age of 18, and this was also not maybe a good idea. The exponential growth idea. No, Faupel and others have shown that from a global point of view, over 200 years by now, we have an increase in life expectancy of about close to 2.5 years each decade, regardless who is the world champion at this point in time. Is it Okinawa in Japan, or is it the Sardinian man, or is it the Abkhazian, South Ossetian, or whatever. So it may change who is the global champion at this point in time, or the Swedes or the Swiss, but it's an almost, not even by major wars, interrupted, very, very stable and linear, and it goes on for 200 years. And since I have been a child and a student, I've always been told, yes, this goes on for one more decade, but then it's going to level off. This we have been taught in the 60s and in the 70s, and we have been teaching this, not all of us, ever since. And now the European Commission says, well, till the year 2019 or whatever, yeah, this is going on in a linear fashion, but then it cannot go on like this. And I have heard this for too long a time to think, yes, there are different schools of thought, and it's a complicated issue, but we have constantly underestimating the increases in life expectancy over the last half a century. So I think we may, for a change, think about the maximum longevity maybe till 120, you know, like the good wishes go, except the question is, how many people live up to, and I showed the data across the age threshold of 80 or 85. So it's impressive that nowadays you have great majorities of the population above the age of 85, whereas, you know, only one generation ago, the majority of men wouldn't even come to the retirement age in many continental European countries. So I think this is, in a way, something I agree with you. Yeah, the women's fertility age does not change, or there's some controversy around, but the fertility pattern changes, of course, a lot. And because I did not want to always look at Cheryl Blair and Carla Bruni and Gianna Nannini and all those rock stars who have studied literature and get their first child with the age of 54, just normal people. I looked up those who have their first child, or a child, at what age, this has been going up in Europe many years, over the last 10 or 15 years. Now, a two-digit number of women get their first child above the age of 40, which is a mass phenomenon by now. Like we had unretirement in Sweden. I thought this is an American phenomenon because Americans have such lousy social security pensions, so they have to go back to work because they cannot make a living otherwise. Now I find, looking for other countries, that Sweden has 14% of the Swedes unretire for up to 3 years from full-time pensions. They go back to full-time work for whatever reasons, because they're bored with their spouses, whatever the reason may be. But they go back to work. So it's a mass phenomenon, not just a very rare bird phenomenon of 1 or 2 or 3%, as it has been a generation ago. So yes and no. There are limits to these changes, but the limits are stretched quite significantly. To Dirk's point, thanks for that you like the idea. Let me just answer to all the issues you raised are crucial. Is it fair to have this? How do we create comparative advantages of flexible retirement? And of course, every pension system. This is the inherent injustice of any pension system, that it redistributes from the short living to the long living, from the Afro-Americans to the white Americans, from men to women. Whether it's 3 years or 4 years like in Israel or 14 years like in the Ukraine depends on how risky male lifestyles are in the Ukraine or in Russia, or alcohol consumption or violence or whatever, as compared to Israel. So Israeli men are obviously much less risk-prone and more decent and more. So they live so much longer compared to women than Russian men. But you cannot undo and the same we know now, for instance, income plays much less of a role than education. We know that region plays a lot of a role. We know that people who are very unhappy about aging, every single wrinkle they are terrorized by, live up to 7.5 years shorter than those who feel this is a kind of gross and mature. The sheer unhappiness about aging, as against being happy about aging, and said, well, sex is better than with 60 than with 30, makes you living 7.5. It's better than smoking or not smoking, to be unhappy. So we know, meanwhile, a little bit of what contributes to. So should we make people unhappy because they have to, otherwise they're living too? No. So the question is, there is a problem with this, but I think we did a study, for instance, whether it's linked to professions. And at first glance, of course, blue-collar workers are living so much shorter. But once you control for region, for lifestyle, for smoking, it disappears. It disappears for women. It never exists, and for males, it mainly disappears. So we were quite surprised to see that. Okay.